Hey gang, it's KR, King of D&D Homebrew, and as the thumbnail suggests, today I'm going to be talking about this module, Slave Pits of the Undercity, very famous module from the old TSR days. I bought this copy in 1980 when it came out. Now, as I've said many times on this channel, I was not a person that played modules. I bought them, and I love to use the maps. Part of the thing was me and my friends bought all these modules, right? So, because we wanted to learn about how to play D&D, so we already knew all the secrets of them. This map, the way these things work, this would come off. You have these famous blue maps that they used. This, again, taught us about designing maps, but it also taught us lessons like this whole thing with the aspis and the ant compounds in these caverns. These were really a pain for people to map out when you were trying to describe them. You had to end up sort of drawing them as they move through. We'd grab the map, draw it, give it back, grab the map, and then have like an ant encounter, aspis encounter, then draw more. We realized it's much better to have these square dungeon type stuff. But, when I was reading this again, after all this time, reading through this module, I realized how much of this was familiar to me, right? And how much it taught us, when we played, especially with the white box, we didn't know how does a temple work? How does, how do orcs live? How do things prepare potentially for, encounters, battles, people coming to the thing. We didn't know. And these things provided that. The other thing they had, of course, with the box text, which was designed for you to give to the players, and then all the description inside, which were the secrets of what was going on. Again, since I didn't play modules, I didn't read these out. I always found it a little weird when people would read them. I always felt like, well, shouldn't you be paraphrasing that? That was just me. But it did give you a sense of that. It also gave you a sense of, what levels you design encounters for, how much treasure and magic you should put in this. All this stuff was in these for us. And I think that it still holds true today that this is a good lesson for designing encounters. Yes, it has historical sort of, nostalgia value, but it's also interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through on the computer here. I got a PDF of this. Go through some of the aspects of this to talk about how they relate to encounter design today, whatever RPG system you're working. How the way it was presented to the players, the way it was presented to you as the GM to think about how you're going to do this, how are they going to attack when you have a spellcaster, what order of spells might they use? Again, it's always up to you, because I think this is still valuable. Again, if you're running an AD&D type system, you could certainly run this module even today. And these are all now available. You can RPG drive through. If you don't want to give money to the old Hasbro, you can find the PDFs out there. But again, even if you're not going to run, some of these were upgraded to 5e. I don't know if this one was. Not sure they work in that environment for a bunch of reasons that not important for this discussion. So anyway, let's dive in. We're not going to review the whole module, but I'm going to go over some of the aspects that I think are interesting in terms of running and designing encounters. We look here right at the beginning, and it says an adventure for characters level 4 through 7, telling you right away this is what it's designed for. To us, again, it may seem obvious now, but adventures were designed for a specific level, right? So again, you have this background that they give you, which for us, this was information about how to create cities, how to create the communities, how to create the criminals, the pirates, the orcs, or whatever. You have these pirates and slavers who've been raiding these coastal towns. The attacks have become more frequent and vicious. And the raiders have burnt entire villages and everything. And so the nobles are, they have to do something. They've put aside their petty squabbles to unite against the marauders. And they have it in this despoiled city of Highport. There's a whole story on this in the Legacy of Greyhawk. But the thing about this is the nobles realize, hey, if we go en masse with an army, the slavers will kill our family members that they've taken and whatnot. They're basically hostages. So the idea is to get adventurers involved, to go in there, infiltrate through stealth. They give you some options too. They could just try to sneak in. They start you off at the secret door of the temple, or you can pretend to be slave traders, right, and try to enter through subterfuge. And these were all for us ideas about, creating this setup and then thinking of how are the players going to infiltrate. Now, there's another interesting little tidbit here. Slave Pits of the Undercity is designed for 6 to 8 characters of moderate levels, 4 to 7. Now, again, 6 to 8. I'm currently running a campaign. I had 5 for a long time. Then one of the characters brought his daughter in. Now I've got 6. That's a lot of characters. And 8, but obviously 4 to 7th level. And then they tell you, well, if they're going to be lower, you should have an exit available so they can leave and come back, presumably to get up hit points and use heal potions or something. Another thing is they're very prescriptive in terms of which party members should be there, right? They say a party wishing to make this attempt at several fighters, at least one or more clerics and magic users, at least one thief. So this is this introduction of the idea of party balance, right? You've set up different things, traps and secret doors, battle situations. You're going to need spells, and you're going to need clerics to heal. 4th to 7th level, they're going to have some heals. Then they give you these random encounter tables, right? Where on a 1 in 6, that's the standard random encounter roll of those days, what you might run into: ghouls, zombies, skeletons, orcs, sturges, and harpies. This is just a ruined temple. Nothing good dwells there. They give you some ideas on what the ghouls accompanied by ghasts, the zombies, the exact composition of the orcs, what they have: short swords and light crossbows, right? Or they have a 4th level half-orc fighter, right? You could have an assassin. This is when they had the assassin class in 1st edition. Then they give you some types of construction. The walls are 10 feet high, right? Unless said 35, the ceilings are 35 feet high, unless otherwise noted. So again, the idea, how high is everything? When people ask you that, you set that out in the beginning, even if it's just a note to yourself so that you know this. And notice, too, these classic descriptions, right? These in the boxes. This is what you told the players. And then you'd have this description, which is what you know. This is where it talks about this trap that's there that deals this damage. So I've got the top level, this first, the temple, the above ground area of this temple up here. And you will notice some interesting things. So here we have 1A, 1B. And they have this trap on this secret door. And what you'll notice is any character standing in the doorway takes 3 to 18 points of damage. And there's no dex save or anything like that on this. No attempt. You just, if you go to the door and try to open it, it triggers the trap. You take these many points. Unless they're a gnome or a halfling, at which it goes over their heads. Kind of interesting. Now, if a thief successfully detects the trap, they discover the trigger rope on the other side by peering through one of the cracks. And this is really interesting. How often, when you have detect traps in your game, do you explain the kind of trap it is? Do you just say, I detect it's a mechanism, and then you had to pick the lock or do whatever, disable the trap? And these are crude creatures, orcs. They're not that sophisticated. The trap is just a standard, it's like a booby trap more than any kind of sophisticated trap. And it just gave us the idea of explaining and thinking about what these traps were. So if you go down this hallway and don't necessarily detect this secret door, you've got a door here, you come down to room number 3. And you see this description that you're supposed to give. There's obviously been fire here, severely burnt. The ceiling has collapsed. There's a chamber on the 2nd floor, about 5 foot of the ceiling. The air is filled with the odor of rot, okay? What you find in here are 8 ghouls. And that's a nice little battle in a room, this big, right? Let's say these are 10-foot squares. That's still 15 by 20. That's close quarter for 8 ghouls and 8 potential player characters fighting away in here. Now, we used to fight in doorways all the time, although this looks to me like a 5-foot hallway here. That's a tight little battle. And then you find your first bit of treasure here, 500 gold pieces and a potion of fire resistance. So you get treasure right away. Why they're hidden in this shelf, what the ghouls would care about it. Did they put it there? Was it left from some other thing? Not important. It's the way it went. You killed monsters, you got the experience, and of course, treasure, because that's how you really got experience. Here is one of these fascinating setups, so common to these early things, and so much to think about. So this place has been ruined, right? So presumably these orcs and I guess the ghouls and whatnot that live there need to move around. So even though you have this floor that's collapsed, right, they've set things up. They've got this board that runs across here such that they can maneuver here. And what this tells you as a GM is interesting. If the crumbling ledge is probed, large pieces of burn wood will crash. If any character steps on the ledge, it will collapse beneath them. Well, actually, that is the left-hand ledge. They don't say that, but you realize that later. Then the center path, you can actually cross upon it. It's sturdy, and you can cross without falling. The ledge to the right is sound, but when the lead character reaches the halfway point, the thing collapses. It's not like a roll. It just collapses. That's how these things work, right? And it knocks the figure off the ledge. There's no dex rolls in these deals, none of that kind of stuff. They just fall. And of course, people used to rope themselves together, and they just give you the 3d 18 points when you fall to the cellar. Here's another interesting thing that was so typical of these kind of encounters. In this room A, this alcove, right in here, there are these wooden barrels. And inside is basically just old soured wine, more vinegar than alcohol. And you can remove the tops by smashing them with a mace. You can roll them around. Well, what happens is in this next room, which is up here 5B, there's this pile of refuse or little stairs that go down, and this giant sundew, which is a monster made for this encounter, and it has these tentacles that come out and do acid damage. And what happens is if it gets a 20, it gets on your face and you're blinded. And the one way to get rid of that is to put vinegar on those, right? So how the players would figure that out to put vinegar on there, this glue that covers your face, is interesting. And they give you instructions. If you release them at the top of these stairs, if you roll these down from here and then through here, it'll cover the floor. And then look at the treasure, 500 gold, 3 gems, worth basically 1510 in gold, and a ring of spell storing with a friend's shatter and jump. That's some nice magic. And the thing about this is it does get 6 attacks. It does do this damage attack, but 1d3 plus this special do have half damage from fire and missile weapons, so it does, it's got 48 hit points. Doesn't really move. The thing is, what you're worried about is that 20 roll, where you get that glue in your face, because that's problematic. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit on this because I want to talk about this cemetery up here. Here's what you describe. You've got markers and crypts. Everything paths twist through this overgrown area. It tells you as the GM that the orcs and half-orcs avoid this place because the plants that grow here do not like outsiders. Another interesting concept. And notice too here, instead of a usual 1 out of 6, 1 to 3 out of 6. You have an encounter. And there's some interesting ones. The branches and the weeds bend and move, blocking the path behind the last person that enters. A tree branch strikes and acts on the Thaco like a 2-hit die monster. A branch will try to pickpocket a player's 65% chance. Then you get these 2 to 8 worker ants. They have this ant thing in the basement. This ant thing was very influential to me. Having read this module, I love to use ants. I had ant mounds and underground ant things, giant ants. It was always fun. Some of my players hated them. The weeds attempting to entwine the legs of the characters. You can also run into ghouls. You are in a cemetery, right? You have to cut these things. They'll block you. A tree is going to fall on you. These trees are animated. They don't really are sentient, but they're very aware of what's happening, and they're going to try to stop the players from doing this. And the tree attacks as an 8-hit die monster, which on the Thaco charts is pretty good, and does 40 to 24 if it hits. That's 48. And again, you stay on the path. If the characters try to move off, these trees will try to stop them. And now you get these bigger trees, 60 hit points, attacks as a 10-hit die monster 4 times around. 1d6 each. So you mess with these trees, and that's why the orcs and half-orcs avoid this place. Then you have in the center this crypt with stairs that go down into the tunnel system, the Aspis nests on the underground thing. Now, it's a very interesting point on this map. If you look at these 2 maps, they have some different areas there's some stairs also in room 16, I think. Let me go back over like this, or 18, there's stairs right here. And when we look at the other map, now unfortunately, when I made a picture of this, this is where this map is, this thing right here. But if we back out from here, there's another stair here that goes down. We back out from this, and if you draw these out, which I did years ago, and you try to figure out where this stairs comes in, if you line this up with this over here, it didn't quite line up. Now, I might just have done this wrong. Maybe somebody out there has played this. Maybe you figured out. But this was one of these classic things, because again, the squares are the squares, so you'd line up these squares, and this distance right here is much bigger than the distance, say, from here over to this area, okay? So, again, what that was about, we could never figure this out. All right, so you've got this inner courtyard here. You have a white in here. Whites are always deadly because they have energy drain, 1 level per hit, right? And you got to have magic weapons. They say that the players should have magic weapons and some minor magic items in the introduction, right? The half-orcs and orcs that live here have appeased them. This white, it stays in the courtyard. But again, and if the party is pursued, their foes will halt outside and prevent them from returning the way they come. Not sure how that was. But there's 2,000 copper, 1,000 electrum, which is basically 500 gold, and gauntlets of dexterity. That's a nice little item. All right, so then if you go down here into area 10 of the ruined courtyard, 2 basilisks. Basilisks are nasty because of that petrification. You blow your save against a basilisk, petrified, turned to stone. You need a stone to flesh spell, not easy to get. And it's the gaze. So again, if they surprise you, right? Because if we look, there's, inside the area collapsed building, walls stand broken and irregular, large number of broken statues, many poses and everything. Again, maybe those statues warn the players, hey, there's something here. But, think about this. You're 4th to 7th level in this thing. You're wandering around in this thing, and you run into 2 basilisks that if they gaze at you, you got to save. Your save is better, but it depends on your character class. If you blow that save, you're stone petrified. That's it. It's not like petrification slowly starts and you get more saves like a 5e thing. It's just instantaneous. Those were the days, my friend. And what is the lesson here of this basilisk thing? They got basilisks and some things on the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. I think it's the 5th level or something. Don't be afraid to use those, right? Especially in a 5e system where you get so many chances to make it. But and they don't have level drains, right? This was so nasty. Now, again, if you explored and got all sorts of treasure, you could go up, although only 1 level at a time. But still, you had things that drained you. You had things that stoned you. This was a much more, unforgiving environment. And if you warn the players and say, hey, this is a tough place, wherever they're going, when whatever kind of RPG system you're playing, this is the kind of thing that you can put in there. Now, this is kind of an interesting little setup, this false slaver's lair, where they've got 20 human slaves shackled and manacled to the walls here in 12A. Now, but actually, this is a fake thing because the 20 slaves are half-orcs whose appearance is good enough to look as human. Again, this is old school, my friends. And what they do is they will attack, right, if it looks like you're going to try to free these slaves or attack the guards or something. And you also have a half-orc fighter cleric who has a bless, a command spell, a darkness, very nasty, a hold person, nasty, silence 15-foot radius if you've got spellcaster. This is a nasty little setup. This is a surprise deal. And this is you as the GM trying to explain this, in a way that makes it look like these are human slaves or whatever. And then what do your players do? Do they just buy it, right? Do you present it in such a way that maybe they don't quite buy it? That's up to you. But if you make it just sound like these are human slaves and they're crying and there's men and women and children or whatever, or, well, they're all men, how are they, how good of actors would they be? So maybe you do say, well, they don't seem as sad as they might be or something, right? So that the players go, is there something up here? I really want to look at these slaves. And maybe you go to inspect them and realize that's a half-orc, right? And then boom, what happens? They also have amongst these half-orc guards 2 half-orc assassins. Look up the character class in the player's handbook of that era, who kind of want to sneak up and backstab the players. And finally, it also says if this goes on for a few visits, they will decide, oh, these are really our slavers, and bring out the real slaves. So if the players are going to pretend to be slavers and not try to sneak in through the secret door that we saw in room 1, they would come into the temple. This is a courtyard in here, room 16A. And you have this, weeds are growing. I think there's some carts here and whatnot. And you got orcs and half-orcs standing around this push cart. And these are the guards and whatever, and they've pushed this table over and everything. And they're going to let you in if you pass the test as being a legitimate slaver, right? And one of the things is this cart has this nozzle which sprays oil, and it can be worked to flame. It does 4d24, another 8 dice damage to the first person, so they can use this again. Again, once this happens, they're attacking you. We're in battle mode at this point. But presumably you might come down here through room 17, this long hallway down here, and you've got these statues. They look like orcs and gargoyles. So the gargoyles are crouched, ready to spring. My players would instantly be like, those are not just statues, right? And you've got this glyph of warding here. It says that it's marked by the X, although it looks like a T to me. I don't see an X there. And what happens if you pass over this glyph of warding? The gargoyle statues are flung at you, and you can take 16 points. You got to make a DC versus paralyzation or a saving throw. And there's going to be tons of noise on this if the players are somehow sneaking in. How they would sneak in after having, done this battle in this room with the flame nozzle, I'm not sure, but it says that because you're going into room 18, which is the main temple chamber, right? Braziers and candles, and there is a woman wearing plate mail carrying a mace. She is a 6th level cleric. Bring my map back up here. I'll go over like this. And they give you her spells. Again, she's pretty nasty. +1 mace, potion of speed, which she could use during this battle, right? And they give you the standard things. They give you some ideas on how she would do this, casting a silence spell in the doorway. Obviously, that's where the player characters are coming from. That's where you want to silence them. A prayer over herself, a resist fire in case the players have a magic user with a fireball, and a protection from good because we're always assuming our player characters are lawful good, right? So they give you this idea. And this is an interesting thing. When you see monsters or NPCs or whatever that you're going to get into a battle situation and they have spells, think about how they would use their spells, right? In what order? What would be their kind of their objective here? They're doing this to you as a player, as a GM to give you this thing. Of course, the other thing is you don't have to do that, right? But they're giving you this advice, and it's good advice, right? It's strategizing. It's saying, I have these spells. This is how I'm going to use them. So think about that when you're setting up an encounter. Or at least, what should I say, we did, because we read these and said, oh, it's not just a list of spells. Where do you put them? How do these things operate? What happens to their underlings? How do they attack? And then you got things, another assassin hiding in the shadows, right? The assassins make a backstab attack. And then you've got actual slaves here in this room, right? And they're just normal people. They don't have anything special about them. And then in this, you've got this ladder that leads down to the grubbery downstairs. And the reason it's grubbery is because you have these aspis creatures that they talk about. I can fast forward, I think, to the end. Let's see if we get the aspis. There we go. They have these gruesome aspis creatures. You've got a drone, the larva, and the cow. The drones are the adult males. Those are the ones that are on the cover of this module. They're pretty nasty here. There's 2d20 appearing, armor class 3 or 2, 6 hit dice. They hit pretty good. Their damage is 1d4, 1d4. So they get 2 attacks or by weapon type. And this is you decide what weapons, because I might give them a sword or something like that. Maybe cudgels or something. I don't know. Basically, the aspis are like weevils, giant living weevils with the big nose things. There's a lot of ground. This is where you come in right in here. There's a lot of ground to cover in exploring this to the various rooms. So the odds are each, what is this, 10, 20, 30, something like that. It's 10, 20, 30, however far you move each turn, you got a 1 out of 6 chance of running into a random monster. So they give you this green slime. It's always funny. Doppelgangers are down here, presumably posing as orcs or half-orcs or whatever. A slaver's band, right? So here you've got 2 to 12 slaves with 2 to 8 orcs. You could have a human fighter on here. Again, there's a 50% chance the doppelgangers are either posing as orcs or just as doppelgangers. And then, of course, 1d6 crocodiles, right? So obviously the players have 2 different options. One is to continue going north, or one is to go to the west. Come down here and go into room 2. You have these stairs in here. This is the Grub Hatchery area. And the floor is totally, garbage and foul materials, and it's mucky, steamy, and whatnot, right? And what happens is it's a pit that goes around. You can actually go around the top of this, right? And there's a chance that you're going to fall into this pit, right? The front rank automatically, if you don't say anything to the GM, hey, we're going to be careful, you stumble down the steps, right? You're going through this garbage, and it's this material in here is corrosive. It does damage, right? And then you take extra drowning damage at the end of every second round. This is what's fascinating about this whole sewage system on this lower level. The idea here is these things, it does continual damage. It's almost like the Pathfinder persistent damage or something, right? And you see that here. And this was something, again, that was influential. If you have sewage in here, it's going to have an effect on creatures that don't hang around in areas with raw sewage everywhere, right? So you've got this kind of complicated warren of rooms. Again, when we used to draw out maps, this kind of thing was a pain to draw. Basically, you just had to end up drawing it for the players, but that's another story. 4 is where they store some food. 5 is an aspis chamber where you have all of these drones. It says the 4 insect men are occupied with various tasks, mending straps, eating, sharpening weapons, and then around their feet, the giant ants. The ants seem to work for the aspis creatures. So again, these aspis, these weevil men, clearly have intelligence, intellect. They're doing stuff. This was the kind of thing, too, where, when you present this to the players, we realize they're doing activities that we associate with humanoids, repairing their equipment, moving food back and forth. They're obviously concerned about the grubs growing into other aspis. And they have these giant ant creatures which, help them and work with them. There's also a trap in this room. It's a net that is coated in sundew stickum. Remember the sundew stuff that got on your face? It was this glue. 5 by 5 foot area. Any creatures of them will fight at -2 because of the entanglement. You need an 18 strength or greater. You can try to break the net, but it takes 3 rounds of activity. Otherwise, you got to cut through them. And the giant worker ants attack first, and then the drones prepare their attack. So I'm going to cover a couple more things in this dungeon that I found interesting. You've got this area here where you've got this basically sewage system running along, and then you've got this ledge that runs across where the players go. And then you've got this trap here. And this is a ledge trap. You fall into the water, then you're being sucked down. You have to drop all items you're carrying to stay afloat. Base percentage is staying afloat, 40% plus 1 for every strength point. You get extras for over 18. But you got 2 rounds to surface. So if you don't surface, then you got 3 points of damage, right? Once you've done this trap, you've alerted, because they'll begin to hear drums, right? The orcs and half-orcs are alerted. There's intruders. Now, I have another little interesting thing that I wanted to talk about, which is this gas-filled room, this sort of innocuous room up here. You walk by the sewers, you come up these stairs, you see this doorway. And this enchambers a colorless explosive gas. And I would also say, if I were running this necessarily, when I see colorless explosive, I might say, you don't smell anything, right? You can say, oh, it smells like rotten eggs. But basically, for a round, torches ignite the gas immediately, but the lanterns, because they have a lower heat source, takes a round. And you basically, within 5 feet of the open door, you get another 3d8. It's a dragon's breath save, and blindness for 2 to 5 rounds. And there's been this explosion, and you're right near the basic Orcan headquarters. So now you potentially, these orcs are going to attack you and your characters are blind. And this is the kind of thing that I would say, think about when you're setting things up. Anytime, as I've had with my players in the 5e, I use these darkness spells, and they just can't stand it because they can't see anything, they can't do anything. They're not used to that rolling at disadvantage in a 5e system. Look up blindness and this colorless, and I would even say odorless gas. You're in this sewer environment. You're in this place where gases can accumulate. Maybe you want to say it smells like rotten eggs from the very beginning, but it's the kind of thing you can do that just, adds that environmental aspect of damage, of threat, of risk. And then, of course, like I said, the blindness is really effective. So there you have it, some of the aspects, I think, of the slave pits of the Undercity module that are relevant today to designing encounters. I'd love to hear from anyone who has played this, maybe in an AD&D system. Maybe they've played some 3.5 or 5 version if it exists. Just what you think about how the box text versus the text for the players. But of course, most importantly, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose. Tell somebody else about it.